Retirement planning from your 30s is what we're going to be discussing today. It is the first video in a three-part series looking at retirement planning from someone in their 30s, someone in their 40s, and someone in their 50s. Today, the main focus being retirement planning in your 30s. The first thing we want to look at is someone in their 30s starting to plan for retirement planning is going to be really strengths they have and weaknesses they have. They have a couple main strengths. The two biggest ones probably being time is on their side and flexibility is on their side. Time, we talk about time. It's time for your investments to compound. It's time for them to grow. It's time for kind of to see a little bit of what's often called a snowball effect, where like you roll a snowball and it slowly builds over time without you necessarily having to do anything. The other thing is flexibility. With that time comes a lot of ability to move your plan, adjust your plan, and make small adjustments to your plan that you might not have available to you the older you are. Now, when you're looking at weaknesses, two major weaknesses you have is there are a ton of changes that take place in someone in their 30s life. You're typically looking at starting a career, so you're looking at probably having a few different job changes. You're seeing your salary be a little bit lower. You're just really getting into the swing of what is going to be your long-term career path. You're usually starting a family during that time period, so you're getting married, you're having kids. Both of those tend to be more expensive endeavors to go through. You're also typically looking at moving into a more long-term home. So you're usually going from maybe an apartment to a starter home to a more long-term home traditionally. And you're going to need a lot of cash on hand for that. Second weakness is you're doing all of these major changes. You have all these major changes that tend to need to have a lot of capital on hand, so a lot of cash on hand, and you're usually in your lowest earning years. So you have the least amount of resources at your disposal. You typically haven't had time to really build up your savings. You haven't necessarily had time to build up your career and your income pathway. You need to save cash for a lot of things. And on top of that, you also need to start planning for your retirement. So, going at the strengths to start with, time and flexibility. If we look at this chart here, what this chart is showing is the percent of your income you need to save to maintain a similar lifestyle in retirement. This is assuming if we were to look at this top row right here, and I'm going to circle with my mouse, a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 35-year-old and so forth. But if we look at a 30-year-old who is making, say, $50,000 a year, that 30-year-old would need to save about 7% of their income in order to maintain a lifestyle of about $50,000 a year in retirement, assuming that they are saving consistently until age 65. Now, it's taking into account inflation, that's taking into account having it actually properly invested, but as you can see, the older you start, so if we said same person, but they don't start saving till 35, they need to save 9%. Same person doesn't start till 40, they need to save 12%. And then the more you make, the greater those percentages go up anyways. So, but what you can tell across the board is the younger you start, the less you have to save in order for that account to grow. To kind of put it a different way, we see a couple different scenarios here. We see a consistent Chloe, a late Layla, a quitter Quincy, and a nervous Noah. And what we kind of can tell here is with consistent Chloe, she starts at 25. She is putting in $200 a month. She is putting in $200 a month, and she is doing that consistently year after year after year until she retires at 65. We're assuming everyone on here that is investing properly is earning about 6.25%. So what you can see is she is saving, and you see this number end at about $420,000. And about 77% of that $420,000 is just growth on the investments. But what I want to really point out is what you see here is this gets steeper as time goes on. That's that compounding effect that we'll talk a little bit more about later. Now, if you see late Layla, she starts 10 years after Chloe. So she's not starting till here. She's also saving $200 a month. She's earning the same 6.25% annually, but she only gets to 210,000 because she didn't have nearly as much time for her investments to grow. Now, the third option here is Quitter Quincy. He starts at 25, the same time as Chloe, but he stops at age 35, right when late Layla's starting. So, what you'll notice is he only saved $24,000 total. He only saved for 10 years, but at the end of that span, at 65 for both of them, he's only $1,000 away, really, from late Layla, even though he saved significantly less than her and only saved for 10 years as opposed to 30 years. That's that power of compounding. That's how Chloe got such a higher goal, is because she started so much sooner but remained consistent. So starting earlier really does give you a lot of flexibility. And again, this is all assuming that you remain invested in a reasonable way. If we were to look at Nervous Noah here, he starts at 25 and saves till 65, but he more or less keeps his funds just in cash. He doesn't invest anything, and that's where you see he doesn't really see all of that much growth over time, just because he's not actually benefiting from any sort of compounding in his investments. He's just keeping it in cash. So being too conservative can really hurt you very, very, very much over a long period of time. Next, I want to look at that compounding kind of mindset. So, what this chart is showing, it's showing someone starting at 32, just starting saving. And what you'll see is their total savings are in green here. So, it'll slowly grow over time, but their growth is in orange. So at the end, at 65 right here, they're going to have just under probably five or just over $5 million. And what you can look at is say the total portfolio growth of that is 3.4 million, and their total savings over their lifetime is 1.7 million. But what I want you to notice, if they start at 32, well, at 42, 10 years later, a bulk of their account value is still going to be what they saved. It's not actually going to be what the growth on the account was, but just the savings on the account. And I always like to say the analogy, if you put $1,000 in an account and it doubles in value, that's great, but you only have $2,000. That's not enough to move the needle. And with retirement planning and retirement investing, it's a long term game. And that's why we talk about the earlier you start, the easier it is, because you typically are going to see most of the wealth you save and build happen after 15 years of saving. So if we look here and we jump over to 47, that's where you start to see this growth really take off and really grow and outpace your actual retirement savings. And that's what we talk about. Again, if we were to go back and look at consistent Chloe, where you see this line get steeper and steeper, that's going to be that growth growing and growing and growing and outpacing the contributions. But I often like to remind people that are starting in their early 30s or their late 20s, or even if they're starting in their 40s a little bit later, it's really easy to quit in that first 10 to 15 years because it looks like the only thing changing in your account is the contributions you've been making. However, it's doing that consistently in that first 15 years where you can really see a absolutely phenomenal payoff on the back half of that retirement saving. And that's where you get that benefit. If you were to push it till 40, well, now 15 years is suddenly 55. If you start till 50, well, now 15 years is suddenly 65. And that's where you get back to the percent that you have to save to play catch up becomes so much higher. Now, looking at some of the weaknesses on here, you have a couple different things. So what we were talking about was, first off, you're typically making the least you're going to make. You're just starting your career. So if we look at an average entry level salary in Georgia, it's about $30,000. So that's just assume what you're having to work with. And then you're looking at starting a family in most cases. So typically, you're looking at childbirth and postpartum care, averaging around 18,000 according to Kaiser Family Foundation. And you're also looking at purchasing your first home. So Georgia home prices, which be it this year, 2022 and 2021, we've seen tremendous growth in home prices, but you're looking at average home price about 359,000. So it's a lot of really expensive things you're going to end up seeing in that early first decade of your kind of life and planning. And you're typically going to have the lowest income you have. So you're going to have to figure out how to balance that and how to balance that specifically for your plan, what works for you, what works for your family. But it makes it extremely difficult. But it does not take away from the fact that if you can even start a little bit early and get that compounding just to start a little bit, it's remarkably beneficial. But that's the end of this this video here. Again, please look at the 40s or 50s retirement plan to start, and we will have more videos out in the future. But thank you.